One of the particularly important characters in Philip K. Dick's novel, The Man in the High Castle, is a middle-aged Japanese trade official named Nobusuke Tagomi, typically referred to by his last name in the story. And we see a lot of things through his eyes and his interactions. He's also centrally important to the plot. He winds up saving the day when there's an attack on the Nippon Times building that we'll talk about later. But I think the most important aspect is that more than anybody else, he provides something like a moral perspective that may be that of the author to some degree for what is going on in the world of the novel. And he's a complex person. I have to admit as well that through my many rereadings of this novel, he has come to be my personal favorite character. So there's a lot to say about him. And the beginning of the novel doesn't actually tell us that much about this yet. He's in the very, very first scene to a certain degree. Tagomi is talking with children, and he says, "Did my Civil War recruiting poster arrive yet, sir? Please recall, you promised it sometime last week." The fussy, brisk voice, barely polite, barely keeping the code. "Did I not give you a deposit, sir, Mr. Childen, with that stipulation? This is to be a gift, you see. I explained that. A client." And then, he says, "It has not arrived yet. I can wait no further more." And he's kind of pulling rank on Sheldon, both in terms of culture and race and in terms of the client-patron relationship. And he's looking for a gift. And he's concerned with this meeting that is coming up with somebody who appears to be a businessman, Barnes, arriving to talk about injection molding and plastics, which is quite important for the Japanese, coming from Sweden. This is going to turn out to be quite different than its first appearing, right? And he is concerned with this meeting that he's going to have. He says, no matter what Mr. Childen came up with, the client would probably not be impressed. Let us face that, he said to himself. At least we can keep him from being displeased. We can refrain from insulting him by a moldy gift. And he's preparing for this meeting. He's thinking to himself, it's essential to avoid politics. He didn't know Mr. Bain's views on leading issues of the day, right? And he actually consults the oracle to figure out, will this connection between him and Mr. Childen, who's providing the Americana gifts, will this actually be useful? And so this, we see the very first encounter with the oracle, the Book of Changes, the I Jing, that Tagomi is going to rely on at many points. And we've talked about that elsewhere, so we don't have to go into too much of that this time. But we see that he relies on it quite a bit for wisdom and for guidance. And there's, this reference within the work itself that it's sort of like an amalgamation, accumulation of the wisdom of the sages, something alive. And it gives him an indication about how to approach situations. So before a lot of the encounters that he has, he will, in fact, engage in the process of divination. Later, he will use it to some degree to reintegrate his self. It's a way of understanding the world and his own relation to it, a world that is deeply flawed. And there's even this sense of the oracle being able to deal with these twisted people, the Nazis, who control probably over half of the world and who have the upper hand when it comes to their main axis ally, the Japanese empire and co-prosperity sphere. So we see him, and this is, I think, particularly important, resorting to the oracle after the SD attack, right? So this is after Tagomi has become sort of a hero, rising to the occasion. The SD, the police, sort of the successor to the Gestapo in this case, are going after Barnes, who's actually Rudolf Wegener, who is meeting with this Japanese general to discuss a terrible plot against the Japanese empire that will result in kind of a world conflagration. And they invade the building, these commandos, and Tagomi shoots two of them with an antique Colt 45 pistol, which he purchased and has been practicing with. And we notice that there's this interesting reflection by General Tadeki and by Bain/Wegener, right? So Tadeki says he will recover his equilibrium in time. Right now he has no standpoint by which he can view and comprehend his act. That book, The Oracle, will help him, for it provides an external frame of reference. And Baines is reflecting on this, and he thinks, to save one life, Mr. Tagomi had to take two. The logical, balanced mind cannot make sense of that. A kindly man like Mr. Tagomi could be driven insane by the implications of such reality. Right? And he goes on further. General Tadeki was right. Time would give Mr. Tagomi perspective. Either that, or he would perhaps retreat into the shadows of mental illness, avert his gaze forever due to a hopeless perplexity. And what is Tagomi actually thinking during this? So Tagomi is resorting to the oracle, right? Here's how it reads. Whole situation confusing and anomalous. No human intelligence could decipher it. Only 5,000-year-old joint mind applicable. German totalitarian society resembles some faulty form of life, worse than natural thing, worse in all its admixtures, its potpourri of pointlessness. And he goes on and he thinks, who really is Germany? Whoever was. Almost like decomposing nightmare parody of problems customarily faced in course of existence. The oracle will cut through it. Even weird breed of cat like Nazi Germany, comprehensible to I Jing, right? Now what we find, though, 2 chapters later in number 14, is that Tagomi feels himself to be abandoned in a certain way. He thought to himself, there is no answer, no understanding, even in the oracle. Yet, I must go on living day to day anyhow. I will go and find the small, live unseen at any rate, until sometime later when, and he says goodbye to his house, to his wife, leaves the house, and doesn't go to the Nippon Times building, thinks to himself, should I go and relax? And he says, no, I must clutch at human life. Perhaps I can never go back to the Nippon Times building and its stink of death. My career over, but just as well. And then he's thinking about Operation Dandelion, and he says, hopeless wherever one looks. The oracle, enigmatic. Perhaps it is withdrawn from the world of man in sorrow. The sage is leaving. We have entered a moment when we are alone. We cannot get assistance as before. Well, Mr. Tagomi thought, perhaps that too is good, or it can be made good. One must still try to find the way. Now, this is very interesting. We see him relying on the oracle when he can, and actually at some point saying, oh, I should have consulted the oracle. I've kind of lost the way in this. But he also has inner resources that he will rely upon, and he knows, perhaps because he has an affinity with it, that there is still the possibility of goodness in the world, in human action, in mindsets, even though evil seems to be winning, to the degree that perhaps the oracle has actually withdrawn from the world and left them on their own. This is very inspiring, I would say. And this leads necessarily to the next main thing that we should talk about, this recognition that he has for evil and calling it out. Again, why he is, so to speak, the moral voice. And the first hint of it that we see here is him talking with Barnes and asking him, as a Swede, for his neutral opinion, criticizing the Germans. And he says, "We have not in our society solved the problem of the aged, more of which persons occur constantly as medical measures improve. China teaches us rightly to honor the old. However, the Germans cause our, the Japanese, neglect to seem close to outright virtue. I understand that they murder the old." And he talks about this attitude. He says, can one take an attitude like this? You're a neutral. Give me your opinion. And Mr. Baines says, well, I don't understand what attitude you mean. And then here we get this moral, what would we call it, conundrum being posed. Towards the old, the sick, the feeble, the insane, the useless in all variations. And he says, isn't it true that no man should be the instrument for another's need? And Tagomi says, during the war, I held a minor post in the district of China. There at Hongqiu, a settlement of Jews interned by the imperial government for duration, kept alive by joint relief. The Nazi minister at Shanghai requested we massacre the Jews. I remember my superior's answer. It was, such is not in accord with humanitarian considerations. They rejected the request as barbaric. It impressed me. And Baines says, well, I can't say anything about it. I'm not a German. Of course, he is a German, right? And he thinks a lot about these sorts of things. But this is quite interesting to see how Tagomi is concerned with these matters. We see a similar thing coming up in the briefing that is going on within his building about by the Foreign Office, telling them about the possible successors in the Nazi state. And we see that as they're discussing these people, Mr. Tagomi felt ill as he listened. He's having a physical response to hearing about these terrible, evil people. And Mr. Tagomi, at a certain point, thinks, I am going mad. I have to get out of here. I'm having an attack. My body is throwing up things or spurting them out. I am dying. So he scrambles to his feet, gets to the lavatory. Several heads turned, saw him, humiliation, sick at important meeting, lost place. At once the panic ceased as he gets through the open door. His gaze ceased to swim. He saw objects once more. And he thinks, think along reassuring lines, recall the order of the world, what to draw on religion, he thought. And then he talks to this other embassy employee, and then he has this reflection, very important. There is evil. It's actual, like cement. I can't believe it. I can't stand it. Evil is not a view. All of our religion is wrong. What will I do? So he's trying to sort out how to make sense of this. And he thinks to himself, it's an ingredient in us, in the world, poured over us, filtering into our bodies, minds, hearts, into the pavement itself. We're blind moles, excuse me, creeping through the soil, feeling with our snoots. We know nothing. I perceive this now. I don't know where to go. Screech with fear, only run away. And so he's having this existential reaction to the evil that is taking place and being discussed. We see this again, too, talking about Operation Dandelion in chapter 12, the arrangement, the meeting that Tagomi is just the cover for of a high-placed military official from the Japanese side and a counterintelligence operative from the Nazi regime, revealing these plans to use nuclear weapons on the Japanese home islands, and the fact that it seems that the dominant faction after the power struggle is in favor of this plan. Horrific evil that is going to be visited on things. And in order to counter this, they are going to have to work with, as it's described, the most malignant portion of German society. And again, Tagomi thinks about evil. Evil, he thought. Yes, it is. Are we to assist it in gaining power in order to save our lives? Is that the paradox of our earthly situation? I cannot face this dilemma, Mr. Tagomi said to himself, that man should have to act in such moral ambiguity. Now notice the reference to the oracle here. There is no way in this. All is muddled, all chaos of light and dark, shadow and substance. So this is quite revealing as well. And then finally, after the attack on the by the SD on the Nippon Times building, where Tagomi has to take 2 lives, after he's managed to reintegrate himself, not with the oracle, but the little piece of Frank's jewelry that contains Wu. He has a confrontation with Rice. And they're essentially talking past each other, right? He tells Rice that, here we go. Allow me to notify you your nation is about to descend into greater vileness than ever. Speaking as a private person, not as representative of Japanese officialdom, I declare heart sick with horror. Bloodbath coming beyond all compare. Yet even now you strive for some slight egotistical gain or goal. Put one over on rival faction. And he says, I am suffering, he told Herr Rice, of malady growing these long years, but which emerged virulent form the day I heard helplessly your leader's escapades recited. Therapeutic possibility nil. For you too, sir. In language of Goodman, see Mather if properly recalled. Repent. And the German consul says, properly recalled. And then they're talking about Frank Fink in his case. And actually, Tagomi is going to save Fink, in part because he doesn't want to cooperate with the evil that the Nazis are doing. And then, interestingly, Tagomi says, conduct future business through intermediate machinery such as mail, telephone, cable, not personally. The consul says, you're holding me responsible for general conditions beyond my jurisdiction. And then what does Tagomi says? Chicken shit, I say that to that. And the consul says, this is not the way civilized individuals conduct business. You're making this all bitter and vindictive, where it ought to be mere formality with no personality embroiled. And Tagomi says, take foul, stinking cigarette along. Now, he's opposing the Nazis and the consul by doing this. But this leads us to another interesting feature of this. He's very self-aware. He is not thinking he is the white knight, righting wrongs, resisting evil. He's just doing what he can. He tells his aide, you witnessed repellent, childish conduct. He made his way unsteadily back into his office, right? And he's thinking to himself, this is not the way to handle bad people. We also notice him at several different points condemning fanaticism. He does so with children when children is telling him about the jewelry and the new perspective that it offers. He's like, I don't want to buy into your Anglo-Saxon fanaticism. It's kind of repellent to me. But he also apologizes to Baines for displaying his own fanaticism. He recognizes this flaw in himself. And I also want to point out that in the beginning, when he's engaging with Baines, Baines calls him up, and Tagomi thinks to himself, oh, I offended him. He must have gathered correctly. I tardily failed to inform my staff about the old gentleman. And he decides, it's just a trifle, but indicative of my foolish and factless attitude. Mr. Tagomi felt guilt. And then he says, I should have consulted the oracle, discovered what the moment is, right? So he's somebody with a conscience, with some real self-awareness. And our encounters with Tagomi end as he begins to suffer a heart attack after his confrontation with Consul Rice. As he fell, he clutched within his coat the silver triangle thing. Did not save me, he thought, did not help all that endeavor. And he says, I'm having a small heart attack. Notify wife, please, right? He hears ambulance noises, and his tie is removed, his collar loosened, and he says, better now. He lay comfortably, not trying to stir. Career over anyhow. German consul will no doubt complain about incivility. Anyhow, work done. As far as I can, my part. The rest is up to Tokyo and factions in Germany. And he thinks to himself, could this be the answer? The mystery of the body, organism, its own knowledge, time to quit, or time partially to quit, a purpose which I must acquiesce to. What had the oracle last said to his query in the office as those two lay dying or dead, the SD men who he shot? 61, inner truth. Pigs and fishes are least intelligent of all, hard to convince. It's I. The book means me. I will never fully understand. That is the nature of such creatures. Or is this inner truth now? This is happening, that is happening to me. I will wait. I will see. Which it is, perhaps it is both. And with that, our story of Mr. Tagomi ends in this very complex narrative.